Ava Williams stood outside a small bakery in Portland, Oregon, her breath visible in the early morning chill. It had been 6 weeks since she packed up her life in Chicago, her job gone, her marriage over, and her sense of self unraveling somewhere between. Now she stared through the window at the warm glow inside, where a woman in her 60s was kneading dough with slow, practiced hands. Ava wasn't sure why she came here every morning. She never went in, just stood there, coffee in hand, watching. Everything had changed too fast. The silence of her new apartment was heavier than any argument she ever had with her ex. People said things like, just move forward or start fresh, but no one told her how. She didn't want a reinvention or a 5-step healing plan. She wanted to feel like a person again, someone who existed in the world even in the smallest way. That morning something shifted. The woman inside looked up and smiled, not like a stranger, but like someone who had seen lost people before. Ava hesitated, then reached for the door. It was a tiny moment, barely noticeable, but for the first time in months, she wasn't running away. She was leaning in, just a little, just enough. Ava didn't expect the smell to undo her. The moment she stepped inside the bakery, the warmth hit her, the scent of butter cinnamon, and something faintly floral, like lavender. It was the kind of smell that reminded her of being safe, though she couldn't quite place where or when she'd felt that way. The woman behind the counter wiped her hands on a flower-streaked apron and offered a gentle nod. New in town, she asked, not with curiosity but with knowing. Ava gave a tired smile and shrugged. Something like that. Her name was Clara. 68, originally from upstate New York, and the owner of the bakery for nearly 2 decades. There was no menu posted, just a chalkboard with 3 items, whatever Clara felt like making that morning. No choice overload, she said. One less thing to stress about. Ava didn't come to buy anything that day. She just sat down at the small corner table, unsure why she hadn't turned around and walked out. Clara brought her a cup of tea and a slice of something warm, then went back to her dough as if Ava belonged there. No questions, no agenda. The next day Ava came back, and the day after that. At first it was just somewhere to go, somewhere that wasn't her empty apartment with the unopened boxes and echoing silence. But soon she found herself reaching for the doorknob with a kind of reverence. Clara's kitchen was slow, intentional. She never rushed anything. The bread rose in its own time. So did Ava. One morning after Clara cut her finger on a serrated blade, she asked Ava if she could help with cleanup. It felt like nothing. It felt like everything. Ava scrubbed bowls and folded dish towels like it mattered. Because for that hour she was useful again. No job title, no productivity metrics, just hands and soap and the sound of a radio playing something old and steady in the background. They didn't talk much. Clara had the quiet kind of wisdom that didn't need to explain itself. But over the weeks, bits of her story came through. She had lost her husband to cancer years ago, started the bakery after retiring from a completely unrelated desk job. "Didn't know what I was doing," she said. "Still don't half the time. I just know I need to be here." Ava asked her one day, "How did you know where to begin again?" Clara paused. "I didn't. I just started doing something with my hands, something small, something honest." That was enough. Ava nodded, but the words stayed with her long after she left. Enough. The concept felt foreign. Her whole adult life had been a loop of proving herself at work in her marriage, even in grief. Everyone expected her to bounce back, rebuild, rebrand. But what if she didn't want a comeback? What if she wanted stillness? That night she opened one of the boxes she had left untouched since the move. Inside was a notebook she used to keep by her bedside. She flipped to a blank page and wrote, "What if healing isn't loud? The next morning she arrived early. Clara was already in the back, but the door was open, so Ava let herself in. She offered to help before being asked. Clara handed her a mixing bowl and smiled. "Now you're officially part of the crew." Ava laughed for the first time in weeks, not because anything was particularly funny, but because her body remembered how. They developed a rhythm. Clara taught her how to shape loaves with care. "Don't fight the dough," she said. "It knows what it wants." Ava began to understand, not just about bread, but about herself. She had been fighting everything, the loss, the uncertainty, the silence. She had been trying to outrun the fact that she didn't know who she was without her old life. A few days after Ava received the voicemail from her old colleague in Chicago, Clara began to look unwell. Not her usual weariness, but something deeper. Her hands trembled slightly, and she leaned on the counter more often. One morning Clara admitted she wasn't feeling right and asked for 2 full weeks of rest. It was the first time she'd ever stepped away from the bakery. Ava took over the shop alone. She moved through the tasks she knew by heart, mixing folding greeting customers, but everything felt heavier. The silence was different now. It pressed. That same afternoon, an official email arrived from Seattle, a job offer with a 3-day response deadline. Salary, title, benefits. It was everything Ava used to chase. She read the message once, then again. Her hand hovered over the phone, uncertain. She imagined Clara in her apartment, moving slowly. She looked at her flour-covered fingers resting beside an unbaked tray of rolls, and without fully knowing why, Ava set the phone down and walked back to the oven. She sat with it for a long time. Part of her wanted to leap, finally a chance to get back on track. But something in her hesitated. That night, she wrote again, "Does starting over always mean going back to who I was?" She brought the question to Clara the next morning. Clara didn't answer right away. She took the tray of proofed croissants out of the oven and set them on the counter, steam rising like breath. "You know," she said, "people always think starting again means making a plan, getting it right this time. But that's just fear wearing a mask. Real beginning. It doesn't shout. It whispers." Ava looked down at her flour-covered hands. She understood. The idea of moving to Seattle began to fade, not with resistance, but with clarity. The life she was slowly shaping in Portland wasn't flashy or fast, but it felt true. And maybe that was enough. She started volunteering at a local shelter once a week. She took long walks with no destination. She cooked again even when it was just for herself. She slept through the night. Not always, but sometimes. And that was new. A few weeks later, Clara asked if she wanted to help teach a small baking class for women transitioning out of domestic violence shelters. "You don't have to say yes," she said. "But I think you'd be good at it." Ava did say yes. Not because she had all the answers, but because she knew what it was like to feel like you had nothing left, and what it meant to be given space, gently, to begin again. She stood at the edge of something that wasn't quite a plan, but felt like a life, not the one she thought she'd have, but maybe one that mattered more. And as she watched the women in the class shape their first loaves awkward and unsure, Ava found herself repeating what Clara had once told her. "Don't fight the dough," she said. "Just meet it where it is." And that she realized was the whole point. Ava didn't expect the doubt to come back so suddenly. It started one afternoon while scrolling through LinkedIn. A former coworker had posted a photo of her new corner office in Seattle with the caption, "Finally, I'm where I'm meant to be." Ava stared at the image longer than she meant to. Sunlight flooding through glass walls, a desk lined with sleek monitors, an espresso machine in the background. That used to be her world, sharp, efficient, forward-moving. The bakery was warm, yes, but it didn't come with health insurance or a 5-year plan. She shut her laptop, but the unease remained. Later that evening, while wiping down the bakery counter, she said it out loud. "I think I might be wasting my time here." Clara didn't flinch. She just kept stacking trays. "Time's not something you can waste," she said. "Only something you can ignore." Ava wanted to argue, but she didn't know what she'd be defending. She wasn't unhappy. She just wasn't winning. And that difference clawed at her in a way she couldn't admit to anyone else. The tension sat heavy the next morning. Her movements felt stiff. She second-guessed everything, the way she folded the parchment, the amount of sugar she measured. She kept checking her phone, waiting for something, anything, to pull her back into the life she used to understand. Then came Jade. She walked in just before closing her hood up, sleeves pulled low. Clara looked at her once, then motioned to the stool near the window. "Sit. You look like you haven't rested in years." Jade didn't speak. She just sat. Ava brought her a cup of tea without asking. The girl wrapped her fingers around the mug, like it was the only warm thing left in the world. Eventually, Jade whispered, "I don't know why I came in. I was just walking." Clara nodded. "That's how most of us get here." Jade became a regular in the days that followed. She never shared much. Ava noticed the tremor in her hands, the shadows under her eyes. One day, Jade lingered after the others had gone, watching Ava roll out dough for the next morning's batch. "Can I try?" she asked. The question felt small but heavy, like a door slightly cracked open. Ava handed her the rolling pin without saying a word. She didn't correct Jade when the pressure was uneven, didn't step in when the dough tore. She let her mess up and start again. Gently. Patiently. Afterward, Jade asked, "Were you always good at this?" Ava laughed. "No, I was a wreck in the beginning. Burned the scones, dropped a whole tray of muffins once. Clara just kept handing me more bowls." Jade smiled for the first time. They began talking more. Jade had been a bartender before the pandemic, living in a small apartment with her boyfriend until things turned violent. Shelters, court dates, pills to sleep. Then nothing. Just floating. "I forgot how to be a person," she said. Ava nodded. "Me too." It was the first time she had admitted it out loud. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. Not from stress, but something quieter recognition. In Jade, she saw a version of herself that still trembled, still didn't know what came next. But she also saw someone reaching, however small, however uncertain. She thought again about Seattle, the promotion, the money, the way it all looked so perfect online. But none of that had made her feel seen. Not the way she did here. Not the way Jade looked at her like she mattered simply for showing up. There was no title for what Ava was becoming. Not a baker, not a counselor, not a leader. But every time she handed someone a loaf of bread and saw their shoulders drop just a little, she felt something shift inside. The following week, Clara surprised them with a suggestion. "What if the two of you co-taught a small class? Something simple, just a few people, nothing fancy." Ava's instinct was to say no. She wasn't qualified. She didn't have certifications or experience. But then she saw Jade's eyes light up, not with excitement, but with belief. And suddenly, the answer was yes. The baking class continued to grow, though they never advertised it. Word moved through quiet circles, recovery meetings, therapist referrals, friends telling friends. One Saturday, as spring air lingered at dawn, Ava led the small group outside the bakery. They walked to a nearby park in silence. No lesson, no goal. Just walking. One foot after the other. Some cried. Some looked up at the trees. Every breath felt like a prayer. It wasn't about healing quickly. It was about making space for presence, for slowness for each other. When they returned to the bakery, no one spoke. They just began kneading. You know, she said, I thought I had to fix everything before I could help anyone. But maybe being broken isn't the end of the story. Ava smiled. Maybe it's the part where we learn to hold other people gently. They didn't need answers anymore, just practice, just stillness, just showing up for one another in the ways they could. And Ava realized something she had been too afraid to name. She no longer wanted her old life back. Not because it was bad, but because it was built on a version of herself that no longer existed. She didn't need the corner office or the title or the perfectly composed LinkedIn post. What she needed was this flower under her fingernails' laughter in a quiet kitchen and the slow, sacred act of beginning again. She was still Ava, still healing, still uncertain, but no longer lost. On a gray Sunday morning, the city still half asleep. Ava stood barefoot in her apartment kitchen watching a kettle come to boil. The steam curled, slowly rising with a kind of grace she'd started to notice in ordinary things. She wasn't thinking about anything in particular. No to-do list, no crisis, no past. Just the whistle of water and the silence that followed. There was a time when that kind of stillness felt threatening. A blank space she had to fill with noise, movement, achievement. Now it felt like a room she could finally sit in without reaching for the door. Clara was slowing down. She didn't say so outright, but Ava noticed. The way she sat a little longer between batches, the quiet groans of her joints when she lifted heavy trays. One afternoon, Clara left a note taped to the bakery fridge. "You're ready. I trust you. Just don't burn the morning rolls." That day, Ava ran the bakery alone. Not flawlessly, she forgot to restock the sugar, spilled a tub of icing, but the customers left smiling, and the counter stayed full. She stood behind the register as the last customer waved goodbye, the door chime echoing, and she felt a warmth rise in her chest. Not adrenaline, not pressure. Just quiet capability. She didn't have to become Clara. She just had to become herself. Later that week, Clara sat beside her during closing, sipping tea. The light was low golden. Ava asked, "What made you start this place?" Clara looked out the window. "After my husband died, I realized I had no idea who I was without him. I spent 2 years trying to keep busy. Volunteering, rearranging furniture, joining book clubs. Then one day I made a pie. Not for anyone. Just because. And when I pulled it out of the oven, I cried. Because for the first time, I had done something just for me." She turned to Ava. "Starting over isn't about finding something new. It's about finally listening to yourself." Ava sat with that for a long time. When she got home that night, she opened a new notebook and wrote 3 questions. What makes me feel present? What am I not pretending to enjoy? What's worth doing, even if I'm never great at it? She didn't have the answers yet. But she had a life that gave her space to ask. As spring crept in, the baking class grew. Word spread quietly through whispers at yoga studios, recovery meetings, therapist referrals. They didn't advertise. It wasn't that kind of thing. But people came. Some with visible grief, others carrying something invisible but equally heavy. They didn't come to be taught. They came to feel. One of the newer students, Marla, had just turned 59, a former nurse who had taken early retirement after a breakdown she refused to name. "I just got tired of pretending I was okay," she said. "And now I don't know what to do with all this space." Ava knew that feeling too well. During one class, Marla broke down over a pie crust that wouldn't roll evenly. "It's stupid," she said, tears falling. "It's not even about the dough. It's just nothing I touch works anymore." Jade, without a word, reached over and placed her hand gently on Marla's. "It's okay if it falls apart. It still feeds you." The room was quiet. And then Marla laughed. The kind that breaks a crack in the heaviness. The kind that lets a little air in. Later that night, Ava sat with Jade on the back steps behind the bakery. They shared a bottle of cheap lemonade and watched the sky darken. "You remember when I first showed up here?" Jade asked. "I thought I needed someone to save me. I didn't realize what I needed was a place to soften." Ava nodded. "Yeah, we all came here with jagged edges." Jade took a sip. "Now look at us, holding space for people, baking bread like monks." Ava smiled, but her mind was somewhere else. That afternoon she had received a letter, handwritten unexpected, from her ex-husband. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet acknowledgement. He was remarrying. He wished her peace, said he was sorry it ended the way it did. She read it twice, then tucked it into a drawer. Not out of pain, but because she had no desire to carry it any further. It was a chapter. One of many. And she had turned the page long before the words arrived. The next morning she walked to the bakery early. The sky was still dark, her breath visible. She moved through the space without turning on the lights, relying on memory and muscle. The walls didn't echo the way they used to. They held her now. She prepped the counter, set out the mixing bowls, opened the back door to let the morning breeze through. And then, with no one watching, she closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm here." Not in a job title. Not in a relationship status. Not in a future plan. Just here. This wasn't the life she thought she'd build. It didn't have the gloss or accolades, but it was deeply lived. And more than that, it was chosen. She still didn't know what came next, but she knew how to meet the moment with care. And that was enough. No dramatic finish. No final breakthrough. Just the gentle, radical act of continuing. 1 year after she first stepped into the bakery, Ava stood by the front window as the morning light poured in, watching the quiet street wake up. The bell above the door jingled softly as Jade arrived, apron already dusted with flour. Clara sat at the corner table, sipping her coffee with a half-smile that said everything without saying a word. The rhythm of the day had become second nature, folding, stirring, greeting familiar faces. But something in Ava had changed, in a way no one could see, not even in the mirror. She no longer measured her life in milestones. There was no grand achievement to point to, no headline that would impress anyone scrolling through a news feed. But there was peace, and presence, and a kind of rootedness she had never known in her years of striving. Sometimes she thought back to that first morning standing outside the bakery with a coffee in one hand and a hollow in her chest. She had felt invisible then, like a story already over. But the truth she had come to understand slowly and quietly was this: no one is ever too lost to begin again. Not every beginning roars to life. Some arrive as a whisper, a cup of tea, a pie crust, a single kind word. Starting again didn't mean rebuilding what she'd lost or proving what she was worth. It meant allowing herself to be where she was, to breathe without performing, to feel without fixing, and to trust that small, honest things done with care could create a life far more real than anything she left behind. The world didn't need her to be impressive. It just needed her to be here. And so she stayed. Gentle, present, unfinished, exactly where she was meant to be. If you're watching this and wondering how to begin again, maybe the real question isn't how, but how gently. Not every fresh start needs a bold move or a dramatic reinvention. Sometimes it begins with something as small as showing up somewhere, soft somewhere, that lets you rest before you rebuild. You don't have to have it figured out. You don't need a 5-year plan. Maybe today, it's enough to make tea. to fold laundry slowly, to sit in the sun for 10 quiet minutes and let your shoulders drop. Healing rarely announces itself. It often comes in these silent acts of returning to yourself. And if it helps to know you are not behind, you are not broken, you are simply in a moment between versions of yourself. That space is sacred. You don't have to rush through it. You don't have to fix it. Let this be your permission to breathe, to begin again, not with pressure, but with patience, not with urgency, but with kindness. You're allowed to start over, gently,